What's going on, Packers fans? Happy Tuesday. Welcome into an all-new episode of the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can find the podcast at Pack a Day Podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Make sure, if you can, to like, subscribe, comment, give those 5-star reviews. And one thing that would be really awesome, if you're on the YouTube channel, make sure to get those notifications. Hit that little bell and make sure that you're notified every time a new podcast comes out. You never quite know when the algorithm's going to change. I've had a couple people reach out and say, hey, I'm not sure why your shows aren't showing up in my feed anymore. Make sure you turn those notifications on so you are notified every single time a new episode is released. That would be amazing. We've got a great show for you today. Before we jump into it, just a really quick thank you to Rich Packer Fan and Marcus CHS08. Appreciate you guys signing up for those Pack a Day Podcast YouTube memberships. Always greatly appreciated, and hope you guys are enjoying the extra content. And of course, we've got a members only Q&A coming up this week. So if you haven't checked out those memberships yet, make sure to do so as well. Like I said, really, really fun one today. What I want to discuss is the viability and just the overall idea of Jalen Ramsey as a member of the Green Bay Packers in 2025. I think it's a really fun topic. And for those of you who might be new here or maybe listening for the first time, first of all, welcome. Thanks again for being here. This is not my general cup of tea. I am not the one that's screaming from the rooftops, go trade for this guy, go do this, go do that. Look at all these players, get Trey Hendrickson, get Jalen Ramsey, it's not usually the way that I go about doing things. Usually take more of a calm and measured approach. And I'm usually the one that's saying, hey, let's give Kamal Hadden a chance. Let's see what Micah Robinson can do. And to an extent, I do kind of like those ideas in training camp, maybe seeing what Hadden and Kalen King and Micah Robinson and those players can do from a backup standpoint before trying to course correct too aggressively. But we're talking about Jalen Ramsey here. Jalen Ramsey's a legitimately really good corner and defensive back in the NFL that has really showed no signs of decline and would be, I think, an immediate impact player in Jeff Hafley's defense. So I am legitimately making the case that if I were Green Bay, I would be looking fairly aggressively at what I could do to potentially add Jalen Ramsey to the Green Bay Packers. There's a lot of reasons why. We're going to get into all of it, but I want to start by saying something that I probably would try not to do. And that is, I'm not necessarily advocating here for a trade for Jalen Ramsey. And there's the possibility that this just makes it a non-starter in totality. Maybe some other team will trade for Jalen Ramsey. Hasn't happened yet. And as we saw in Green Bay, it can sometimes be very difficult to unload a former all-pro corner that is making a good chunk of money. Different situations and circumstances. Jair had injury issues and has not been able to play. That has not been the case for Ramsey, but Ramsey's contract is even more difficult to probably latch onto. And you are looking at a player that's now over 30 in Ramsey. He's only 30, but still technically over 30. And again, if there are not teams out there that want to give up anything of value in a trade, or maybe again, they also feel like Ramsey's eventually just going to get released, then maybe he does, in fact, hit the open market. Maybe the Dolphins do ultimately release him, and Green Bay could go after him at that point in time. I'm not completely against trading for Ramsey. I am pretty against trading for him at the contract that he's currently on. If Miami would decide to eat some more of that by taking on signing bonus, like converting base salary into signing bonus and having to pay more of it themselves so that Green Bay would be able to get him at a cheaper cost, now we're potentially talking of like, okay, I'm willing to give up, some sort of day 3 selection to make this work. I don't think the optics are a major issue of giving up Jair for nothing and then trading for Jalen Ramsey. It certainly should not play a factor in Brian Gutekunst's decision-making. It could be a little bit of a, an issue from an optics standpoint of what you traded, or you got rid of Jair for nothing and then had to trade something for Jalen Ramsey. What are you doing? But I do think the big thing here is they're two totally different circumstances, specifically the fact that Jair has been injury prone and not been able to stay on the field. And as we'll talk about, Jalen Ramsey's been the exact opposite of that, which I think is the big difference here. But my bigger thing is, again, I would be more for if and when Miami does release Jalen Ramsey, then being a bit more aggressive in going after him at that point in time. I think a trade is a little bit more complicated. Now, some of you might remember back and say, Andy, I'm pretty sure when we've asked in the past of like, would you trade Jair Alexander for Jalen Ramsey, or could you see a Jair for Ramsey trade? You said no. And that is true. At least I'm pretty sure that's come up at some point. I'm pretty sure I discussed it, whether that was on Bleacher Report, Pack-A-Day Radio, Packer, or Pack-A-Day Podcast, or whatever it might have been. I'm not entirely sure, but I know it came up at some point. And if you're wondering why, then I would be advocating for maybe trading for him if the contract is a little bit different or changed, or going after him in free agency. The reason being is because these were two players that just were destined to basically not be traded for each other. What I mean by that is there were no teams that wanted Jair on the contract that he was on, and we're seeing it's very difficult to get a team to take on Jalen Ramsey with the contract that he is on. So I don't think the Dolphins had any interest in taking, I'm almost positive because no team did, on taking Jair and giving up something for that contract. And I don't think Green Bay has really any interest in taking on Ramsey at his current contract and trading for him that way. So a swap of the two never really made sense, and I didn't think it was ever feasible. However, what I will tell you is I don't think it's like completely insane. The odds are still insanely slim in general, or crazily slim, but I don't think it's entirely insane to think that if Jalen Ramsey does end up being released, that Green Bay could be interested and maybe even potentially sign Jalen Ramsey, and that the Dolphins could potentially be interested in Jair Alexander and even potentially sign him. Just both of them being at lesser, contracts than what they were on when they would have potentially been quote unquote traded for each other, which again, just never seemed feasible. But having them actually swap teams in what ends up as like a pseudo trade, I don't think is like the craziest thing in the entire world. So the reasons why I am for this are pretty vast. One of the things I'll say just at the forefront of all of this is I have always been a Jalen Ramsey believer. I think he's been a great player all the way back to his college days. I loved him coming out of the draft. Loved him in Jacksonville. There've been a couple, bumps in the road here or there. Obviously won a Super Bowl with the Rams. I don't think his Dolphins tenure has been anything like super special or to write home about, but he still was really good this past season. And I just think overall, he's a super talented player that is going to bring something of real legitimate value to any team that he ultimately ends up on. So that's the easiest thing is I've always been a pretty big believer in Jalen Ramsey and what he can bring to any football team. But the biggest and most obvious reason why Green Bay would potentially want to make a move like this is their depth concerns at corner. I don't think I'm breaking any news here or messing with anyone when I say that Green Bay's depth at corner is the most concerning group of players at any position on the team. It's the position where you look at and say, man, one injury could change things pretty drastically in a hurry. And everywhere else, I feel really good about it. You could also, I think, get pretty close to making an argument where corner might be the position where you have the least upside high end player, meaning Jordan Love has a ton of upside at quarterback, Josh Jacobs at running back. There are a variety of wide receivers that have pretty big upsides. Whether they hit it, we'll have to wait and see. But there are definitely those at wide receiver. Tucker Kraft at tight end, Zach Tom at offensive tackle, Rashawn, or on the offensive line, Rashawn Gary on the defensive line, even Devontae Wyatt. We could even say LVN potentially. Edgerrin Cooper at linebacker, Xavier McKinney at safety. Your highest upside player at corner is who? Nate Hobbs, Carrington Valentine, Keyshawn Nixon. You could maybe make an argument for any of them, but there's not anyone that you would be expecting to have any real legitimate chance at making a Pro Bowl anytime soon without making a significant jump kind of out of nowhere. So this would be adding a high-end player to that room, somebody that does have a ton of talent and does have a much higher upside. And then it would also really solidify that position from a depth standpoint. We've talked about it. You've got Javon Bullard that can play that spot, but you have three real corners that you have any faith in at the moment. Carrington Valentine, Nate Hobbs, Keyshawn Nixon. That's it. After that, you get to corners that just have no real legitimate experience in Kamal Haddon, Kalen King, Micah Robinson, anyone else that you want to discuss that's currently on the roster. You add Jalen Ramsey to that group and you basically solve everything, right? You have a high-end player that raises the upside of that group and has a legitimate player who, given the right set of circumstances and him staying healthy, I think could be even an all-pro level player in Green Bay. Certainly a Pro Bowl level player, but I think he could get back to that all-pro level of play. And you also really save yourself from any of the concerns of if one player goes down. If Jalen Ramsey goes down, you still have the three guys plus, Javon Bullard in that situation. If two guys go down, you still have two guys on the outside plus Javon Bullard, or you have three guys if Javon Bullard is the guy that gets hurt, etc. You have a lot more faith that you can get by with even a couple injuries in that scenario where you don't really have that right now. And there's just not a lot of corners on the market that make a ton of sense. Not really in the market for Rasul Douglas. I don't think that's the right move. Asante Samuel Jr., I don't think fits the defense great. Coming off a neck injury, don't think that's the play. Jalen Ramsey does feel like he is everything that you would potentially be looking for, that raises the ceiling of the defense and the defensive backfield and basically erases any concerns that you have with any depth in the secondary at any point in time. So there's a very clear and obvious reason, or reasons, just in and of itself, of why this would maybe make some sense for Green Bay. That is one of about 16 reasons that we're going to go over today as to why this would potentially make sense. But the depth is a real concern, and the high-end play of those corners is a real concern, and you are basically killing two birds with one stone by signing Jalen Ramsey in that scenario. The next is the team fit. I think this is a great place for Jalen Ramsey to land. He would be one of the true veteran leaders on this team. You don't have many 30-year-olds on this roster, right? You have two 30-year-olds, in fact, and they're both specialists. That's your long snapper and your kicker. That's it. I think adding a veteran like Jalen Ramsey makes a lot of sense because he actually has that Super Bowl, pedigree. He won one with the Rams. And I think he just is going to be able to help a young team navigate some of that. From a position standpoint, it's Green Bay's arguably their biggest position of need at the moment. We talked about the depth and the high-end upside that he would present to this corner room. And I just think that we're going to go through a lot of other things. I don't want to spoil necessarily any of them, but you're talking about the fit with the defense, with Jeff Hafley, how they could utilize him, all of those things. I think he is a perfect fit for Green Bay for a variety of different reasons, many in which we're about to get into. The next is that we know that Green Bay loves their versatile players. It is something that I'll just say, I was going to go in a different direction. I'll just say they get very, very excited about when they get players that can play multiple spots. Well, hello, Jalen Ramsey. This past year, he played 365 snaps at right cornerback, 363 snaps at left cornerback, 185 snaps in the slot, and 114 miscellaneous snaps as a box player, a safety, and all over the place, right? There are also many who believe, really from his days at Florida State up until now, that at any point in time where you want to play him at any safety spot, he will be a great safety, a la like a Charles Woodson or someone like Rod Woodson, that you play great at corner, maybe you slow down a little bit, you move back to safety, and he's still going to be a stud at that spot. I count me as one of the people who believe that as well. Now, in Green Bay, with the depth that they have at safety, you probably don't need that, but it's another thing that he could do should you suffer injuries at safety and need him to do that. It just gives you more options and versatility throughout the course of the year. And again, we know how much Green Bay loves their versatile players. More importantly, though, it gives you the ability to play him in the slot or outside, or again, mix and match him wherever you want to ultimately play him. The next thing is him plus Jeff Hafley equals, I don't know what the ultimate answer is, but let me just tell you, I would be so insanely excited to find out. Finding Jeff Hafley unique, fun, versatile toys to play with in his defense is a good idea. Everyone wanted to talk about with Jeff Hafley when he came to Green Bay. Everyone wanted to talk about him playing maybe more single high, being more aggressive, maybe some press man-to-man coverage. Those were the big talking points, if you remember, when Jeff Hafley came to Green Bay. If you want to go listen back to the episodes when Jeff Hafley first came to Green Bay, there's one thing that I kind of picked up on and singled out very early on from his very first press conference. And it was his ability to adapt. His adaptability was what stood out to me. He talked about in his opening press conference, the first couple times we got to meet with him, he specifically talked about having the ability to change his defense based on the players that he had available, but also change his defense dependent upon the teams that he was going against. Some of that can be relatively elementary. Of course, you're going to put a game plan together for the specific team that you're playing against, but this is more than that. This is legitimately molding your defense to what is going to put your players in the best possible positions to succeed week in and week out. He even went as far to say is, hey, if you give me stand-up outside linebackers that can rush without their hand in the dirt, that they need to stand up, then we'll stand them up. If you are better as an outside corner rather than a slot, like, let's get you on the outside. Like, he was willing to basically build the defense for even individual players in certain situations and circumstances, but trying everything in his power to put his players in the best positions to be successful. It's why I'm very excited to see how he utilizes Colin Oliver, a player that has some off-ball linebacker as well as potentially stand-up outside linebacker, as well as potentially pass rush specialist defensive end abilities. Why I'm excited to see how he uses Isaiah Simmons, who has been this player that has not been able to be unlocked. And I think if there's anyone that can, it's Jeff Hafley. You give him somebody like Jalen Ramsey, and I think Ramsey is going to be able to be utilized in a variety of different ways. And I think Ramsey would absolutely love that in playing in a style of Jeff Hafley defense that he might get different assignments week in and week out. And the other thing that I'll add on top of that, and we kind of talked about it just with him being able to line up different places, with Jeff Hafley and with Jalen Ramsey's versatility, added on top of Keyshawn Nixon and Nate Hobbs and their versatility, you now have 3 corners who can play the slot or play on the outside. And what you can do with that is really mix and match dependent upon the opponents that you're going against. Maybe I'm just throwing these things out there. I'm not saying that this is fact, right? I'm just throwing like the general idea out there. Let's say in general, Keyshawn Nixon's best on the left, Jalen Ramsey's best on the right, Nate Hobbs is best in the slot, right? And that's the general rule of thumb. But one week, you go against the Detroit Lions and Amon-Ra St. Brown's in the slot and Jamison Williams is on one side and, you've got Tim Patrick on the other side. And you want to be able to kind of utilize your players to best match with those players. Well, you could theoretically one week put Keyshawn Nixon on one side, Jalen Ramsey on the other, and Hobbs in the slot. The next week, you could get to a situation where the best matchup for you is playing Ramsey in the slot because they're going to use maybe it is Amon-Ra St. Brown, or maybe it's a different slot receiver or a bigger tight end that they're going to use in those situations that Ramsey fits better with. So you can put Ramsey in the slot with Hobbs and Nixon on the outside. Maybe you're better off in certain situations with Hobbs and Ramsey on the outside. You want to put Nixon in the slot, or Nixon and Ramsey on the outside. You want to put Hobbs in the slot. You can do all of that, and you can do it game in and game out. You could do it at the last, like in your pre-snap situations. If you wanted to, even if you're in zone or man, you don't even have to have a tell, right? You could have Nixon, Hobbs, and Ramsey on the field. And you could say, wherever, Justin Jefferson goes, we're going to have Jalen Ramsey go with him. And wherever Jordan Addison goes, we're going to have Nate Hobbs line up across from him. And wherever, the third receiver goes, whoever it ends up being, that's where Keyshawn Nixon's going to be lined up. And again, it could be any version or iteration of that. But now, whether you're in man or zone, you can have the player that you want start across from the wide receiver that you want. Now, of course, Minnesota could go in motion and it could throw some of that out of whack. That's all within the realm of possibility. But Green Bay now has a level of ability to mix and match depending on the receivers that they're going against, and maybe dictate terms a little bit more than most teams, because most teams don't have 3 corners that can play both slot and on the outside, and specifically both left and right and in the slot, no matter who you're going against. So the ability to mix and match those on a game-to-game basis, on a down-to-down basis, or just to kind of give different looks at different offenses, I think would have a ton of value to Jeff Hafley as well. So that, to me, is another reason to do it. The next is your ability to be an amoeba-type defense and a true pre- and post-snap confusion nightmare for quarterbacks. I'm sincere when I say, if you went with this is no disrespect to Evan Williams, who I think could also do this, but you could put Javon Bullard, who we know can play in the slot, right, at safety, with Xavier McKinney at safety, with Ramsey, Nixon, and Hobbs at corners, right? You could mix and match those in so many different ways. You could ultimately, I believe, put 2 of those guys in the slot with like Bullard. You could even put Bullard and McKinney in the slot as like in like a pre-snap look. And you could have 2 corners on the outside, like Nixon and Hobbs, and you could have Ramsey at safety lined up. And then you could rotate 1 down and rotate 2 back. Like, we could go in so many nerdy situations here where you could show something pre-snap and then the quarterback goes back to pass and the look is so incredibly different post-snap. Even so much as you could theoretically, because we see some of this inverted cover 2 stuff from Jeff Hafley, you could come out in a situation where like Javon Bullard and Xavier McKinney are lined up at outside corners and you've got Ramsey and Hobbs at safety. And then they invert through the course of the play. The safeties come down, the corners go back, but your corners were safeties, your safeties were corners. Like the amount of stuff that you could do to just, for lack of a better term, F with opposing quarterbacks pre and post snap is remarkable, because you could line these guys up almost anywhere. Even Evan Williams, you can throw him in the conversation as well. He has the ability to do a lot of that stuff also. You are almost to a point, especially if you're playing zone defense a ton, by the way, which I expect Jeff Hafley to do. You're at the point where you almost have a positionless defensive backfield when you have any iteration of Evan Williams, Xavier McKinney, Javon Bullard, Nate Hobbs, Jalen Ramsey, and Keyshawn Nixon. You can mix and match those guys in so many different ways. Again, both pre and post snap. It has the ability to mess with teams in a real significant way. Now you got to prove you can do some of it, and you're going to, like, in theory, it sounds great. But even last year, even when you didn't have all of that, the stuff that Hafley was able to do with the mixing and matching and doing some inverted cover 2 and those sort of things already was messy with. Now you can do so much even more of it because you even have more versatility. There is a real fun aspect of that. Another aspect of this is there is a part of me that legitimately believes that Jeff Hafley would like to throw a little bit of man-to-man coverage in, at least to sprinkle in from time to time. We didn't get to see a ton of it this past year, I think in large part because Jair was injured and then you just didn't have the pieces. With Jalen Ramsey, you do have a player who can do a little bit of that. And you can even do some mix and match stuff where you've got the most of your players playing zone, but you could do Jalen Ramsey playing man-to-man against Justin Jefferson or somebody, pressing him at the line of scrimmage, sticking with him while everyone else remains in a zone. Again, these are the things that Jeff Hafley would be able to utilize because he has so many different weapons at his disposal. But having a big-time corner like Jalen Ramsey will just give him more optionality in the type of defenses that he wants to roll out there. And in a world where you're going against a team, let's say like the Washington Commanders, right? I think that's a decent example of it, where we'll see what Debo can be in this iteration of him and those sort of things. But you have one primary receiver that you need to sort of shut down, right? In Terry McLaurin. You could have Jalen Ramsey try to match with Terry McLaurin a little bit more and feel a lot more comfortable with Nixon and Hobbs matching up with, again, some of their other wide receivers, and feel like you could play a little bit more man-to-man if that's what you wanted to do. Again, just more options, more tools in the toolbox for Jeff Hafley. And I'll say it one more time, that is usually a very good thing. The next reason why I think it makes sense is availability. We know already that Nate Hobbs has been a little bit injury prone in his career. Now, Nixon's been good. Carrington Valentine's been good. But again, you don't have a ton of depth there. Well, with Jalen Ramsey, he's played 9 years in the NFL. 7 of those years, he's played 1,000 snaps or more. 7 out of 9, he's played 1,000 snaps or more. Like, it's a really impressive number. And in the other 2 years, it wasn't like, well, he had really those other 2 years was 780 and 659. So even in his quote unquote injured years, he was still playing a pretty significant amount of snaps. So his availability has been phenomenal. He's got the build for it. He's tall, he's physical. He's got a good height, weight, speed. Like he's built for the NFL. And more often than not, he's going to give you those 1,000+ snaps. So again, having the availability, which has been an issue, of course, with Jair, it's been an issue with Nate Hobbs in the past. This is going to give you somebody that more often than not is going to be out there for the long haul for the season and be able to give you those 1,000+ snaps on the season. I love the fact that he would give you another veteran communicator on the defense. And I kind of love the fact too, that he and Xavier McKinney would be in the same defense together. I think if you're looking for, Jalen Ramsey to come in and play the best version of his brand of football, having Xavier McKinney in that same locker room, I think goes a long way. And just giving him that motivation and having those guys playing together, I think they would feed off of each other. I think Ramsey would make Xavier McKinney better. I think Xavier McKinney would make Ramsey better. And I think those two being better would make the defensive backs around them better. And I think that would hopefully give the pass rush a little bit more time to get home. I think it just is I use force multiplier quite a bit. I don't know that it would like do it to that extent on the entire defense, but I do think it would have an effect on everyone in that defense in a very positive direction. And I would be very excited for that. Also, you already are hesitant to throw anywhere near Xavier McKinney. And if there's any hesitation towards throwing towards Jalen Ramsey, well, now you're starting to run out of different areas of the field to throw to. Yeah, you're probably going to entice teams to throw more at Keyshawn Nixon and Nate Hobbs, and whether it be Javon Bullard or Evan Williams. But I think you can survive that. And again, just having two guys out there like Ramsey and Xavier McKinney, I think is going to make this defense very, very difficult to throw against. The next thing is you have the money to make the move. Yes, every money and every dollar, I should say, that you spend now is less money that you're going to have available in 2026 because of carryover cap. I understand that. I get that. I get you have a lot of free agents, but at some point you have the money. You're probably willing to give Jair something, right? Even if it was 10 million or whatever the case may be, you can use a portion of that towards Jalen Ramsey. And I think there's no real concern for me right now that Green Bay is going to have to let really good players go because they don't have the money. They haven't even started the triggers for like borrowing money from the future. And I'm not saying Green Bay wants to get there sooner rather than later, but there is ways to still keep any big free agents that you want down the road. And signing this one player now, I don't think is going to get them to the point where it's just like, well, that's going to cost them Zach Tom, or that's going to cost them. They're not there. They're going to have the avenues needed to still re-sign key players. And I don't think this changes that. In the meantime, it gives you the ability to go out and add a significant piece as you're really looking to go out and compete for this upcoming season. Next is you have division opponents that have some pretty darn good wide receivers and matchups week after week. And whether you're playing Philadelphia with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, or in the division again with all the talented wide receivers from Addison and Jefferson, DJ Moore, Roma Dunze. They obviously added Luther Burden as well in the draft, which I think is going to be an interesting player for them. Jamison Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown is a very, very talented division of wide receivers. And adding somebody like a Jalen Ramsey is just going to give you more of a puncher's chance and more ways to potentially have answers and solutions to all those problems that these teams with such great wide receivers cause. We have seen Green Bay, not in the playoffs last year. They did a pretty good job overall of shutting down A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, but it just gives you more options to try to go about stopping some of these high-powered offenses in big games when that's what you need to do and are trying to do. Like as mentioned earlier, he's got Super Bowl experience. I think that's a value add to this team. I think he raises the ceiling of the team. He's still performing at a high level, had a 76.9 PFF grade this past year. Went and watched some of the tape. It looked good. And then PFF had him as the 10th best corner in the league. Like that is, you're adding a theoretical top 10 corner to your team at this point in the season. It's a really tough thing to say no to. Like there's a lot of reasons why you'd want to say yes. And then the last thing I'll say here from a reasons why to do it standpoint, I understand that when Brian Gutekunst talked about urgency, it wasn't about acquiring players. It was about for people in the building. It's time for these young players to step up and have that level of urgency. I think the anecdote, the message is still clear and should be presented to Brian Gutekunst as well. There should be a level of urgency. It is time to start winning championships. And I do think Jalen Ramsey gives you a better puncher's chance at having the ability to go out and win that championship because he's on the roster. And if you have the ability to do that on middle of June, late June, whenever he potentially becomes available, if he does get released, I think you need to I'm not saying exhaust all resources, but I think you have to have a really strong conversation within the organization as to whether or not this would be a good idea. And I think it is a really good idea. And if I were Brian Gutekunst, I would push very heavily for this to be the move that the Packers should and could make. And I think it would be one that, for all the reasons that we listed so far, would give Green Bay a really good opportunity to make a run at this thing in 2025. Of course, those are the reasons to do it. There are always counterpoints. There's always counterbalances to it as well. First and foremost, like we talked about already, he could just get traded. Some team could give up something legitimate for him, and that probably just ends the conversation right there. I don't see Green Bay doing that. Maybe Jalen Ramsey's one of these players that isn't super fond of playing in the cold weather. He played in Jacksonville, played in Miami. He played in LA. We haven't exactly seen him in the Green Bay's, Chicago's, Seattle's, New York's, etc. I don't know that that's the case. Could just be happenstance, but if he is one of those players that's like, nope, don't want to go to Green Bay, that could be a showstopper as well. He could theoretically want to reunite with the Rams. There's been some smoke to that as well, that the Rams would have interest in bringing him back, that he could potentially want to go back to LA. It's a team that makes a lot of sense. They could definitely use him at corner in LA, and that could be one that just ultimately gets done. But again, if not, no, then maybe you should get involved in that conversation. He could be too cost prohibitive. I'm for this, but there's a limit. I probably would not go in that 20 plus million range for Ramsey. I would probably only want to do a 1-year deal. I'm not looking for any sort of 4-year, $80 million. I'm not looking for any of that. I'm talking about a 1-year, $18 million deal. If you can get that, I'm in on it. If not, I think it probably just gets a little bit too cost prohibitive for what you want to try to do moving forward. And that could be a showstopper for Green Bay as well. I do think you need to consider future contracts, and it is a pretty significant contract one way or the other for a 1-year window. If you do sign him to a 1-year, 18 or 19 million type dollar deal, that's 19 million that you will not have to spend on other free agents next year or to re-sign your own guys for a potential 1-year window with Jalen Ramsey. That's a big cost. I'm for it. I think being aggressive sometimes is worth it. I think, again, you got to spend money to make money, and scared money don't make money. But there is the real downside that you're losing potentially 18, 19 million on a 1-year deal for a 1-year window. And if you don't win it this year, that's money gone, spent, over with, done with, and you don't have anything to show for it in future seasons. So that's worth noting as well. Ramsey could want more than a 1-year deal. He could say like, hey, this is my last year to cash in. I want a 3-year, $60 million deal or something. Which again, if that's the case, probably would just be out if I'm Green Bay. And then last but not least, he has reached that 30-year-old threshold. And there is a real threshold that, sometimes teams don't want to go over. Green Bay seemed pretty hesitant. They only have 2 on the team, and it's Matthew Orzik and, of course, Brandon McManus as well. So that could be something where Green Bay just says no as well. But to me, he would still be worth it the way that he has been playing as of late. How this would come to fruition, I think he would have to be released. And, of course, he'd have to be open to coming to Green Bay. And then Green Bay would have to go to him with a competitive offer, probably even maybe matching or going above and beyond some of the other teams like in LA Rams. If that were to happen, then I think there is a real opportunity for this to ultimately come to fruition. I'm not betting on it. I'm not saying it's super likely, but I also do not think it's impossible. And what I'll say there too is the Green Bay Packers have shown a propensity for a while now in going over and trying to sign generational players. Reggie White, obviously a key iteration of that. Charles Woodson, another one. Julius Peppers, we saw. And then even it didn't work out, but I would say Jimmy Graham was a pretty generational tight end as well. Like, even though that those guys were over 30 when they signed him, because they were who they were and because they've had the impact that they have had in the NFL, Green Bay seems a little bit more willing, or at least has in the past, to make those type of deals. I could see Jalen Ramsey being another one of those that's in that conversation at the same sort of level, maybe more towards it doesn't even matter. Just in a general sense, a 30-year-old, but one that's been having a epic NFL career and could still add huge value to Green Bay. I could see Brian Gutekunst having some level of interest in that. Again, whether or not it actually happens, that remains to be seen. I think as we've gone over today, there are plenty of reasons for it. I think there are reasons why Green Bay would potentially say no, again, depending on what the trade value would be, if they would have to trade for him, what that contract looks like. Is it a multi-year deal? Does Ramsey not want to play in Green Bay? Those are all potential things that could cause this to fall apart. But if I were Green Bay, I would go after it pretty aggressively, see if there's an opportunity to make that happen. And if so, I think he would be a massive addition for Jeff Hafley in this Packers defense, and one that potentially could put them over the top. That is going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for joining us. Make sure, again, to hit that little notification button if you're on YouTube to get the notifications anytime a new episode comes out. I'll be right back here tomorrow with one of those new episodes. Make sure to, again, follow us wherever you get your favorite podcasts and on social media at Pack-A-Day Podcast. Shout out to our All-Pro and Hall of Fame members, Most Hated Minnesotan, PJ Wynn, John Wild, Brandon Paletta, Boom Handle, Donald Lee, Lori Lord, Baby QB, David McCluskey, Donald Decker, Alex Wong, Peter Ritaka, Jay Zimmerman, B. Brown, Puerto Rican Packer, Dan Gessford, Dylan Patscott, SoCal Pack, Chris Rager, Izzy Roberts, Ian Ewing, Jake Koner, Carlo Delgado, Willie Winklestinkle, Jen Wright, The Gable Storm, Matt Geiger, and Pack Attack Cast. I will see you guys tomorrow, but until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.